Hi, this is Street Life and I'm Natasha, back at it with the discussion of Home Alone. I decided that I wanted to revisit some of my favorite holiday movies for December. And so among those, there's certainly many to choose from, but I decided to start with Home Alone, which I've seen 50 million times. As a kid, I absolutely enjoyed it. It's one of those movies that no matter how many times you see it, it's very enjoyable. It just has a lot of replay value. And so this year, Thanksgiving is like a time of year when, depending on like the size of the crowd that we have gathering for Thanksgiving, it kind of determines what we do on the day of and leading up to it. If it's a really big crowd on the day of, we might chit chat with each other while having dinner and after. If it's myself, my mom, and maybe a few other people, a smaller crowd, we'll have dinner and then either watch movies during or after dinner while chit chatting and whatnot. It's something that I've actually grown to really enjoy. And so this year for the holidays, because I knew I wanted to review Home Alone, my mom and I had like a pre-Thanksgiving dinner. We watched Home Alone and my mom she really enjoyed it. I liked it, but she loved it this time around. Home Alone is just one of those movies where I think it's great for people of all ages. It's a kid's movie because the star of the movie is a kid, but it's not like one of those overly simplistic baby type movies where you as an adult are sitting there and it's mind-numbingly boring for you. Especially at this point because the movie came out in 1990. Kids who were born around that time or were kids at that time would now be adults. As Macaulay Culkin, the star of the movie, he's now a grown man, around like 40 or something like that. It's one of those movies where at this point in time, it's been around long enough where many of us saw it in our childhoods and we're now adults. It makes it nostalgic. It's a timeless movie that you can watch with kids in the present, and I think you and they would enjoy it. You can watch it with older people who are adults then, and, hopefully still around now. So pretty much the premise of the movie is you have this kid, Kevin McAllister, who's living with his family in the suburbs of a well-to-do suburb of Chicago. It's leading up to Christmas. They have family visiting from out of town, and the family's going to be traveling to Paris to visit Kevin's uncle. So Kevin's family is pretty big. And with these additional people, it's even more people in the house. They live in a mansion, or rather a McMansion. It's a pretty fair-sized house. Him, his siblings, his parents, uncle, aunts, cousins, and all that kind of stuff. So it's even more people packed into the house. There's a lot of activity. There's a bunch of kids running around. Kevin feels a bit pushed around, but he's got a bit of a mouth on him. I don't know how that would have flown in my house, but he's a little bit mouthy. He gets into it with his older siblings, which granted, his older brother does start some of the drama. On the morning when the family's supposed to be leaving, he's sleeping off in another part of the house and gets left behind. And so from there, you have this kid who's 8 years old, has likely never been alone for good reason because he's a little kid. And his family has now flown across the Atlantic, find themselves in France at this point, at which they then realize that he's missing, that he's been forgotten at home. And it so happens that it's at the holidays. Much as his family has gone away for the holidays, a lot of the other families on his block have as well. And so you have this duo of robbers who've been casing the neighborhood. One is played by Joe Pesci, and I can't remember the other guy's name. They've been casing the neighborhood and realized that pretty much the majority of the houses on the block are going to be empty because the families are going to be out of town. And so with that, they have this plot where they're going to just go from house to house and steal everything that they can, burglarize these houses while the families are away. Unfortunately, Kevin kind of gets in the way of their plans, as his house, given its size and the amount of stuff that they see in it while casing the house, becomes a prime target. There's this unexpected monkey wrench in this little kid being at home. And I guess some of Kevin's spunkiness kind of makes him well suited to be the kid in such a situation. As at the start of the film, one of the complaints that his siblings have is that he lacks independence. He can't do anything for himself. He's constantly in need of help. Granted, this is a result of him being 8 years old. And it's like, you can be independent to a degree at that age, but with him being that young, the mom probably helps him out a lot. But here he finds himself alone for probably the first time in his life, having to figure things out for himself, to take care of himself. And it so happens that you have these bandits who were casing his house. So at the start of the film, he starts out as this, your general kid who's afraid of what I think most kids would be afraid of in a house if they're left home alone, right? He's somewhat afraid to be at home by himself. He's afraid of like the basement, the noise from the furnace, things like that, which I think most kids or many kids would be afraid of. It's something that kids would relate to. But then at the same time, you have these little things with him where he's in the house, he's afraid, and the place that he runs to is his parents' bed. He hides out there. And pretty much during these days, you see his mom trying to get back home to him. I thought it was actually pretty cute that he doesn't sleep in his own bed, but rather he sleeps in his parents' bed. It's like a place of safety for him. And you just have these, what are now classic scenes. The scene of him getting up in the morning. He's like eating all kinds of junk food and trash because his parents aren't around to tell him any better. He has like this huge bowl of ice cream, and it starts out as what you would probably expect from a kid that usually has their parents looking out for them, telling them what to do and what not to do. And now on his own for the first time, it's like bedlam. It's freedom. And so he's just taking full advantage of it, but gradually starts to see that there's a way that he should be doing things. So like getting up in the morning, giving himself a bath, practicing good hygiene, to the point of him with like this big bottle of spray deodorant and Brute or whatever it is, right? The aftershave and whatnot. There's this iconic scene of him splashing on his face and then screaming from the burn. So just these cute little scenes of him being independent, going out to the store, grocery shopping, making meals for himself, not really cooking, but, getting TV dinners, which is fine with the kid of his age. And there's like these comic scenes of him like trying to make do on his own, but at the same time being smart enough to kind of avoid letting other people know that he's by himself. Just like some really iconic scenes where he makes use of like, there's this old movie that he watches. And as part of this ruse of trying not to let other people know that he's at home by himself, he uses the playback function of the VCR to throw off other people. So like he'll pause it and play specific parts to get like an adult's voice to provide audio. And it leads to some pretty iconic scenes. There's also quite a bit of comedy. Macaulay Culkin is certainly the star of the movie as Kevin, and I think a large part of what makes the film work is the interplay between not just him, because he's like a cute little kid, but Joe Pesci and the other guy. I think his name is Rob something. The two bandits and their interplay with each other. But then they also do a really good job with Kevin as well, where there's kind of this back and forth throughout the film of them trying to rob this house, him foiling them, and it culminates in this scene towards the end where they figure out that he's actually home by himself. And so where he's kind of been able to put them off for a few days, there's this final showdown of sorts. I would compare this where he finally decides that he's not scared anymore and he's going to take them on. And as the man of the house, he's going to defend his home. It's not anything I would suggest in real life, but he makes up his mind that he's going to defend his house against these bandits, and hilarity ensues. Like, my boy has a war map and lays out traps and whatnot. It kind of reminds me of, if you think of those complicated like domino setups where you knock down the dominoes and they knock down the rest of them, and there's the bowling ball and all this kind of stuff, or like those cartoons with really complicated mouse traps where like you tap this one thing, it hits that, and da 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 da, and on and on and on. And so I've always found that kind of stuff fascinating, and like the mouse trap game and the domino type setup thing and whatnot with these different triggers. So the movie culminates in this scene towards the end where he's set these various booby traps for the bandits, and hilarity just ensues. Just imagine a little kid thinking up this kinds of nonsense as his way of defending the house, like icing the steps, putting tar in the basement steps, hitting them with paint cans. It's like slapstick comedy, but then at the same time, you have these two adults who interact with each other as well. And in addition to them interacting with each other, you see them interact with Kevin. And it just makes for an incredibly classic collection of scenes, an incredibly classic movie that I think you can watch just time and time again and never get tired of it. I think this is a great film. It's a good film to watch with family. You know, sometimes you'll have films that are like entertaining for kids, but they're really boring for adults to watch. This isn't one of them. Sometimes you can have films that are entertaining for adults, and I think especially at that time, in the years since, you sort of had Pixar and some of the more recent Disney films where there's a better balance between the content that's intended for kids, but can also be entertaining for adults. But, you know, they've added in some good things. You know, the story is good, the acting is good. It strikes just the right balance between being age appropriate for kids, but at the same time being well written and actually entertaining, where it's a film that would still appeal to adults. And so with that, I think it's an incredible film. I'm sure mostly everyone has seen it already, but if you haven't watched it in a while, I think it's definitely worth revisiting, especially around the holidays with your family. I just love the ending scenes with like the booby traps and all that kind of stuff. That's the high point of the film for me. But there's certainly some moments leading up to it that I think are really funny as well, or, you know, cute and sweet. Joe Pesci, quite often, well, at least I'm used to seeing him in like Scorsese films, movies with him and Robert De Niro. I can't really think of any other comedies that I've seen him in. I'm used to him being like gangsters and things like that, but that might just be my ignorance. But in this case, I think it shows that he has amazing range. It's something that's touched upon in other films where it's like he's got this funny voice, and in other films he's unintentionally funny, but it works here really, really well. The other guy, I just can't remember his name, but the two of them go really well together. Kevin is cute. He's a cute little kid, but the three of them, they just bring the film together. The film really works because you have these two adult bandits and they're both really great in their roles, right? But then you have this kid who's also a really good actor, and it makes for an incredible movie. Certainly over the years since, there's been like the second Home Alone, Lost in New York, which I think is also pretty good. There's been quite a few since then. I've seen maybe one or two of them. I don't think they're as good, and I think they are like kind of over milking it. But here in the original, it comes together perfectly. It's an incredible film. You can watch it over and over again. And I think if you decide to adopt my family's tradition of watching Christmas movies around the holidays, this is certainly one of the classics that you could add to your repertoire and enjoy for many, many years to come. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click that thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.